Hi, and welcome to our program. I'm Gary Knoll, and each and every week at this time, we're here to share information on how to improve the quality of your life. It was 3 days ago when I received a call from a friend. They said they were suffering from acute diarrhea, extreme distress in the gastrointestinal area, nausea, and sharp pains. It was a woman saying that she had pain similar to her worst PMS pains. I asked her, have you eaten anything at a restaurant outside the house? She said, yes, my husband brought home something from a outside Korean market. I said, were there any salad greens in it? She said, yes. Now, knowing they're vegetarian, I knew it wouldn't have been from chicken, but that doesn't mean you can't get salmonella poisoning, because frequently in these restaurants, they'll take a cutting board and they will cut raw chicken and use the same knife and the same board to cut salads. So it's very possible to get that kind of infection, cross-infection. But I thought that the culprit would probably be more likely a particular type of parasite. And that is due in no small part to the fact that many, if not most of the people who work in restaurants, washing dishes, preparing food, handling food, frequently do not go through proper sanitation. Now, having owned 3 restaurants in the past and being very fastidious about it, I can tell you that time and again I've watched people come out of the bathroom working in the kitchen and have not heard that water being turned on, and I'll say go back and wash your hands. Oh yeah, I forgot they say go back. Well, what happens? What's actually on the hand? What's causing as many as 30 million Americans to end up sick each year unnecessarily? I asked Dr. Lewis Parrish, considered America's foremost expert on parasites, to join us to talk about virtually a hidden malady in the American system of health today. Welcome to our program,
Thank
Dr.
you very
Parrish.
much.
As it turns out, this woman went to the hospital and was checked and had a stool sample, and it was found that she didn't have salmonella, so probably now it's parasites. But explain how common parasite toxicity is and why people watching should be interested in this.
Well, because it's a very common infection, particularly in large urban populations, where in the kitchen, as you said, they have people who come from lands where it's endemic, and they come over here. A lot of them can't even read enough if you have that sign that all employees must wash their hands. A lot of them can't even read it. And as you say that you don't even hear any commode flush or anything, how do you know they got their hands clean before they go in and start using, cutting up the salad? That's where most of them work rather than the cooks. And so if you're eating out, it's a good thing to avoid eating too much in the way of raw materials, which is sort of hard for a vegetarian, as you said she was.
What are some of the symptoms of the infections that occur from parasites?
Well, I divide the symptoms into 3 groups. Those of the gastrointestinal tract, of which you've got diarrhea alternating with constipation, slight nausea, grumbling in the belly, and sometimes an irritated anus. The second group is the fatigue group, not waking up refreshed no matter how long you slept, wanting to sort of nod at the most inconvenient times, as in a board meeting or when you've gone to the movies even, you want to go to sleep. And the last thing is a lack of motivation to do anything. You have a long list of things you want to do, but you just really can't summon up enough energy to do it. Some people sleep their life away with it until they get it under control.
Now, why isn't it being more commonly diagnosed?
Well, I think that it's like several other diseases, that the young doctors, since it was not a big problem, they didn't think it was, that the present generation of doctors never thought anything about it, you know, as it's being a possible diagnosis. And if they did, they sent it to a laboratory where the technician probably hadn't seen one under the microscope since he was training. And so you get back a false negative. Now, all the doctors are told you should get 3 stool samples if you take a casual stool sample. But there are stool samples that are gotten by what we call a purge stool. You go in the morning and they give you a laxative, and you go out and eat, and about 2 hours later, I think it's a rush to the bathroom, which one of the various patients are there. So they get liquid stools, and the liquid stool is what they analyze by special technicians. Now, I have come up with a modification of that, or a better one, I feel, and that's where you examine the rectum. And you get in there and you take swabs of the superficial mucosa. And you take that immediately to the technician. The one I have now has done nothing but parasites for the last 15 to 20 years. And he looks at it on the microscope to make his diagnosis that way. It's much simpler than a purge stool and much more accurate than the casual stool.
What exactly is he looking for?
He's looking primarily for two things. You said parasite diseases. Well, basically, I have a subspecialty of that in protozoal diseases. These are one-celled animals, like the amoeba you saw under the microscope. And there are two main ones of this group. One is called Entamoeba histolytica, which causes amoebic dysentery. And the other one is called Giardia lamblia, which has a rather characteristic face like two eyes looking at you. And he's looking for one of these two. But frequently, I would say, I've gone over my statistics lately, and better than 50% who have one, the other one has this other one as well. Now, the infection with Giardia lamblia is called giardiasis, and it is coming by leaps and bounds now to come up and press the amoebic infection. It's so common now in water supplies that hikers and people who are going to mountainous areas like the High Sierras or the Adirondack, or here in New York State, for example, you go upstate, and you can find it in the water streams up there, these beautiful streams that look so good they just tempt you to go and drink it. But if you do, you may run a risk of getting the infection unless you boil the water, which is the only safe thing to do.
And that's because the beaver and the moose and the animals are using this also, and they're defecating in it, and that defecation becomes the medium to infect the water?
That's exactly right. Against the laws, the rules about protozoal disease, it was supposed to be species specific. In other words, humans can only give that to humans, dogs can only give that to dogs. But we found out that some of these animals, like you say the beaver, are contaminating the streams. And so when we drink it, we pick up their infection, which is the same thing as ours. I had two patients who were forest rangers up in the Adirondacks, and they said they had to spend more time keeping the people from drinking the water and going swimming in it than they had to show all the people the wonderful scenery around them. But there are signs in some places like Yellowstone, Yosemite, says, don't drink the water. And the reason for that is because they may be contaminated with particularly the Giardia.
Now, when a person goes, let's say to Mexico, because that's one of the more common places, what exactly are they getting sick from?
Well, they're getting sick from three things. Perhaps Montezuma's revenge really is a bacterial infection. There's also a viral infection, and there is also the protozoal infection I'm talking about. Now, you can differentiate those by virtue of the fact that the bacterial, and maybe the virus infection as well, come on and you get really sick. You are just prostrate at that time. And you have nausea, vomiting, liquid diarrhea. You don't know which has got to tend to first. And you have high fever, sweating, chills. But the thing about that infection is that you recover from it fairly quickly within 2 or 3 days. By the time you get home, everything is settled down, it's quiet. With the protozoal infection, you have some of the same symptoms, but they're not as severe. And very rarely do you have upper gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea and vomiting. It's concentrated more in the small intestine if you have any pains, and in the large intestine. And when you get back home, you may still have some disordered bowels, or maybe even a little slight nausea. You don't get over it like you do with the bacterial infection.
Now, bacteria would infect all species. So why is it that people living there who drink that water every day are not affected in the same way we would be?
Well, Gary, it's because of one of your most favorite subjects. It's because the ones that live have the strongest immune system. I sometimes think that the protozoal infection, maybe even the bacterial infections, are not the first time in life that we have a Darwinian selection. 2 children can be born at the same time, both of them exposed to the same possible infectious method, and one of them goes ahead and begins to live and grow up, and even though he may have minor symptoms, the other one dies. So when you go down there to Mexico and you see all these people running around, I'll bet you that a large percent of them have the protozoal infection. But they are so used to it, they've let the symptoms go by so long, that they probably wouldn't know what it was like.
It would be similar then to people living in the Middle East.
Oh yes, by all
who
means.
have the parasite from snails that is estimated to infect over, and I saw the statistic recently, it was amazing, it's over 300 million people. It's schistosomiasis, the snail larva.
Yeah.
It's in the water, and that it causes liver infection, which in turn slows down the metabolism, giving a person a lethargic attitude. So frequently when we were looking at the lifestyles of people in that area of the country, we saw kind of a listless, lazy
Right.
attitude. Might not have been listless or lazy at all, might have been they had adapted to a chronic infection that lowered their immune system and caused them chronic fatigue.
Well, I definitely believe that is what is going on with the people infected by the protozoa. I don't have any statistics, but I would say in the greater metropolitan area, it's about 50%. Now, that may sound like it's pretty high, but then 50% of the people here have come from endemic areas. I mean, there's not much that shows up in Puerto Rico as primary cause of the infection. They seem to live with it pretty well. But they could come up to New York City and bring the infection along with them. You were talking about that lethargy that existed. I've sometimes wondered if this is the reason that the Latin Americans have their afternoon siesta. They just don't have the strength to put up a full day. They need to rest, because a lot of times, which as you know is basic with animals and that, you know, even us, that we get sleepy after eating. And we've been trained not to, but you watch your dog or your cat, they'll get sleepy after eating. So they go home, have their lunch, go to sleep for a little while, then they go back to work. Now, I don't know whether the protozoal syndrome is the cause of that, but it certainly could be indicted.
So what you're suggesting then, Dr. Parrish, is that half the people right now living in this area are infected.
Yes.
May suffer from fatigue, may suffer from
erratic bowels
and problems of digestion, and may be attributing it to something else.
Yes, very frequently this is what has happened. Patients come in and say, no, I can't eat that, or that gives me diarrhea, or that caused me to have acid indigestion, when they're really relatively common foods that these people are eating. But they've grown so used to it, they stay away from the foods, or they get used to it, when it's not really any intolerance to the food, as it is that those foods may act up, and because the disease is cyclic, it may be in a bad cycle when they ate those. So you can't make a summer out of one swallow coming home, but if they have learned over the years that these foods are bad for them, well, they should stay away from them until they get treated. Then they'll find that that appetite can tolerate more things.
How long does this live outside of the human body, this parasite?
Well, the trophozoite, or that's the active stage, you know, that swims around and you see it put out its arms here and there. That is the infective, most infected part, stage of life. And that can't live but an hour outside of the body. And if it is, get it into your system, well, the acid in the stomach will kill it off. But the protozoa have a wonderful way of avoiding this. And that is when they are ready to go out and infect other people, that they wrap themselves with a sort of crust, and they get into a cystic stage. Now, we used to think that wouldn't last more than a week outside, and then only in tropical climes. That's why it's known as a tropical disease. But now we've seen it occurring more and more in temperate climates, like the Near East you were talking about, temperate climates, and that can live up to a month or so, even in extremes of temperature. And when you take that, you have to pick that up with some food that have been contaminated by fecal fingers, as it has been called. Well, they can get right through the stomach without the acid hurting them. Then when they get inside, that's when they begin to multiply.
And then they eat their way into the intestinal wall?
They eat into the intestinal wall, sometimes making little ulcers, and sometimes just making the mucosa look friable or fragile. And that is when they do their harm. I mean, the Giardia, for example, lives in the upper part of the intestine, the duodenum and upper jejunum. Those are small parts of the intestines. And this is where most of the absorption of essential nutrients occurs. And so they could become deficient if they don't take some supplements when it's in its acute stage.
Now, what do you do to actively try to destroy these once you've detected it in a person?
Well, they are pretty hard to deal with nowadays. There are several medications that you can use. And I guess I've heard of about 30 or 40 different diets and supplements that are used. But none of them seem to be too effective, really. And the main thing you have to do is go from one to another till finally you get the disease under control at a point they can live with. And I use chemical means, I use supplement means, herbal means, and if a patient wants to, psychologically it's good for them to have high colonics. It doesn't do much in killing them, but at least it washes out the colon so that the protozoa won't have anything to eat on, because they'll eat all the material that comes from their boring into the cell, to the walls of the small intestine.
Now, what about such items as what Indians use, red pepper, cayenne pepper, raw garlic, that have a strong purgative effect in the intestine?
Well, that is a very interesting question, because people who have the infection, or people who feel they're going to get it, say, well, I can't stand hot foods. Yet if you take, for example, Mexico and India, both of which places this infection is rampant, but they have a very, very spicy cuisine. Now, you would think that they, you know, in the evolution of their symptoms, that if this hot, spicy food like paprika and red hot peppers, that they would have learned to cut them out of their diet, but they haven't. So I don't know whether it has a salutary effect or a detrimental effect. And certainly garlic is everywhere recommended for intestinal parasites. I know that people will take, you know, a whole clove of garlic, you know, and will chop that up and take that every day. Take it up to the point where it's coming out the pores in the skin. So you really have to give mega doses of it, like mega doses of vitamin C, which I think that you said a lot of people used. And I've tried it since then. And it's much better if you can cure it by the simple means. Because, you know, the actual drugs that the medical profession now has to treat it with can have untoward side effects. And they are not all that effective anymore, because the parasites have developed a resistance to these drugs. So sometimes it's almost like feeding them, and nothing new is coming up, because the medical establishment doesn't really believe that this disease is any problem, and they are not doing any work in the laboratory or scientific on new drugs. Now, some have been developed in Europe, but the FDA hasn't let them loose here in the city yet. You can get it through the Center for Disease Control if you can convince them that this person is really infectious. But I mean, bureaucracy is taking care of these drugs. Fortunately, they don't seem to be more effective than the drugs we now have. If they were, then it would be horrible if the FDA was holding it up.
What percentage of the people who you've treated have you seen respond using the non-harsh treatment?
Well, I will tell you, I can't give you any figures on it, because most of the people I have seen and have put on this new medication and the herbs and so forth had already at some time been on the chemicals. And sometimes it's hard to say which was the one, what do you say, the straw that broke the camel's back, which one really made the turnaround, or whether it's the effort and effect of all 3 or 4 of those, and you go in stages, because any improvement that you get is like walking up a staircase. You go up 3 steps and you drop down 2. You walk up 3 steps and down 2, till finally you reach the point where the person can say to you, okay, I feel fine. Now, ideally, I hope that they've gotten rid of their under their microscope, it's clear, but I really, not that I'm giving up too easily, but sometimes if patients will tell you, hey doc, look, you know, I came in here with certain symptoms, they're gone now. You may say they're still under the microscope, and I can trust you because you helped me out. But quite honestly, I'm tired of coming up here and paying money and wasting my time to be sick and when I feel okay, and then you tell me I can walk around the corner and pick it up again. So my symptoms okay, when they get out of control, I'll give you a call, okay? And they've taught me that, yes.
So in essence, a great deal has to do with the immune system.
Right.
As long as your immune system is raised up, as long as you're eating those foods and taking those herbs and vitamins, such as vitamin B6, biotin, garlic in its odorless raw form, vitamin C throughout the day in large amounts, megadoses, acidophilus culture to reestablish a normal healthy bacteria,
flora, right.
And taking even the microalgae like seaweed, which has a strong purging effect, that you're raising the body's immune system so the person can actually live with the parasite. So there's a medium of coexistence so that when a person gets without this and they reinfect themselves, they're going to go down. As long as they're able to keep their immune system strong, they'll be able to live with it.
Well, I like what you said, because in the last 6 months, I've come to believe that the patients develop some sort of immunity, though you can't use that word. You can use the word resistance. That we talked about earlier, the ones that were affected in childhood, the one with the stronger resistance is the one that grows up. You know, childhood mortality is the main cause of children's death, and the protozoa is one that does it. And then you watch the patients, and when they grow up, they seem to be able to live with it, have minor symptoms, but they have symptoms, but they can ignore them. So I think a resistance in helping the immune system really is one of the primary factors.
Now, what exactly is in your herbal preparation, or some of the common herbs?
Well, we've got astragalus in it, we've got some garlic, we've got some kelp, we've got some pau d'arco in it, and we've got ungo di gatto, which is cat's nail, which has been used very frequently down in the Brazilian countries, and it's even being tried out here, believe it or not, though you can't get any information on it, that it has helped the immune system in cases of cancer. And two big universities were researching it, and they certainly seem to think we were onto something. But where it's gone, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to lay the blame on anybody, but a lot of times the pharmaceutical houses are not all that interested in letting other herbal preparations, or for which they can't make any profit by patented things.
What are the most common ways now, just so we can recapitulate for the audience, what are the most common ways of infection?
The most common way of the infection is to eat or drink something that's been contaminated by the fecal matter of another person, or as you say with the beavers. And these fecal fingers can touch your food at any stage of it, except when it's very, very hot. If you're going to try to avoid it, then you've got to eat very hot food, like a steak or baked potato, because anytime you eat a salad, a fresh food, that fecal fingers have been on it. And this is anything that has come from the fecal matter of an infected person contaminating something you eat, or in the course of the other one, Giardia, in the course of the waters that you drink.
Or anything they touch, it could
If you get it into your mouth, I mean, I'll ask people, they'll ask me if it's all right, safe to kiss, and you pass it that way. Well, I ask them, I don't know what was long on your lips, you know, because people that are contaminated, but you don't get it from the toilet seat.
All right. I would imagine a very high percentage of the gay population that engage in anal sex would be infected.
Well, you're right there. About 85% are infected. And it's almost a true saying that if you see a gay person, you can estimate that 85% have it. And it also, I was reading an article the other day written by 2 doctors from the University of Virginia, and they were talking about the fact that this protozoal amoebic breaks out occurred about 2 to 3 years before the AIDS epidemic. And these protozoal infections can put out some sort of lectin, it's called. It's like spraying some sort of proteins, a toxin, and they stop, they encourage these cells that are already infected to become more infectious. So it reduces the incubation time. So I think we have here not only the gays are markedly infected, but also there's some relationship between it and the immune system and AIDS.
Excuse me, for years we were told that the health of the circulatory system was supreme to the body. But for the last 100 years, naturalists and natural hygienists have said that the health of the intestine was equally important. And boy, that's really coming home with a passion.
Well, it's funny you say that, but I'm writing a book now, and it's called Internal Ecology. Everybody's talking about the external environment, but the inside of the intestines covers such a wide space that you have more of it exposed to whatever's going on outside than you do skin. And so the internal ecology can be helpful with the right bacteria, the right absorption and so forth, and it affects many aspects of our lives. So I've been researching that now because the internal ecology, I think, is very important to you. So you pick up so many diseases from the food that you eat or water that you drink that I think you're right, that it's perhaps, and that's where the naturopaths and the nutritionists all come in, and I like to work with them.
Good for you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Dr. Lewis Parrish, he resides in Manhattan, and he's telling us about something that half of us are infected with, and we're not even aware of it. We just may be seeing the symptoms and misdiagnosing them. So don't eat raw vegetables or salads. Eat cooked foods out. For those of you in Connecticut, virtually every city in Connecticut now is able to see this program, and all of New Jersey, and of course Manhattan and other parts of the United States, we welcome all of you. For those of you who have any questions for myself or my guests and can't reach us, just write a letter to Gary Null, send it to care of WBAI 505 8th Avenue, New York, 10018, and I'll forward it on to my guest, or if it's for me, as long as you send a stamped self-addressed envelope, I'll be happy to answer it. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Hans Nieper talking about alternative approaches to cancer that they're using in Europe with spectacular results. So stay healthy and stay well, everyone, and we'll see you next week.